Washington will have an elite defense in 2024.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sport stops sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, we're coming back from practice number 5, and we've got a whole bunch that we got to get to over the course of the show. We're going to talk about the running game because it looked real nice, and we're going to be talking about the early returns on some of the spring transfers that, now that we're a full week into practice, we want to say, or we're almost at a full week, that we want to not necessarily put some grades on it, but talk about some guys who've certainly stood out. But we're going to do that after we talk about Washington's defense, because we saw what seems like the majority of the install seems to be complete on the defensive side of the ball, just in terms of some of the formations, the different alignments that we saw today. And it really could be one of the best in the nation.
Yeah, and I think it gets back to what we were saying in the spring, where there's so many different body types. So you have a multiple style defense where there's no two ways about it. You could say it's a 4-2-5. You could say it's a 5-1-5. It's there's 11. That checks out. Yeah, the math heads up there. I was making sure wasn't given a 12 man on the field. But that's the thing. And the other thing to consider is when you look at how some of the alignments are shaking down, the spring transfers really do kind of tell a lot of that tale, where you can see there's even more intention to, okay, why did you bring in a second safety? Oh, now we see why you kind of sought out Cameron Broussard with a big body type and the things that he can do that I know we're going to talk about later on. There's just so many different things you can't pigeonhole this defense into one or two things. And I think it's not even a problem, but it's a kind of almost a way of when Steve Belichick says, "Oh, it's the Washington defense." Well, what does that actually mean? Because we've seen a lot of different iterations of Washington defense, and I don't think he meant to say it that way, but I think the implication being, well, Washington can kind of do a bunch of different things on defense. You had Vita Vea, you had Marcus Peters, you had Shaq Thompson, you had all these Buda Baker, all these different types of guys that can do different things. You're not going to see one base defense. You might see three different defenses on 3 different games back to back to back, just based on how Washington wants to counter whatever Big Ten opponent they're going to face.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one thing that I really like that you mentioned that, because as you said, it's because I got this question from one of our insiders the other day, Insider Luke, and he shot me a note and he said, what is Washington's base defense? Would you call it a 4-2-5? And I said, yes, I guess, because we were watching, some of the plays today, and it looks like it's a base 3-4. Then all of a sudden it looks like a 4-2-5. And then all of a sudden it looks like it could be a 4-3 at times. All of a sudden, it could look like a 5-1-5. There's a bear front in here where we saw plays where there were no down linemen. And there are so many different things that this defensive scheme is going to do. And as you said, that's one of the things about the Bill Belichick scheme. And obviously this can be different under Steve and at UW, as he said, where, it's going to look different. But that was one of the things that was really good at adjusting to what the opponents can do. And all of a sudden we're going to see a whole lot of, maybe 5 down linemen against an Iowa or a Wisconsin or some of these teams that are really heavy on running the ball. And then all of a sudden, we're going to go with a light box. We're going to dare some of these other teams run the ball because we know that they want to throw it to beat you. So they're really multiple in that sense. And at the same point, watching, some of these guys all of a sudden line up on the edge, where we saw, I believe there was one point today where we saw a 6-man line where there were just that many bodies crowding the line of scrimmage, and not in terms of like 2 linebackers in the A gap, like you've seen time and time again, where it's different places where there's safeties coming down and basically playing on the line of scrimmage. There are so many different things that this defense is doing to not only cause confusion, but to just mix up looks and mix up pressures and mix up all these different things that, when executed effectively, which I believe the defense has done a really great job of early on in fall camp, that can be one of the best in the country.
No doubt. And I think that, kind of as you were saying, that you just can go through the different things that the defense can do. And I think on top of that, there's not one way to go about this defensively if you're Washington. Yeah. And when you talk about like Deshawn Lynch, for example, is a guy that we've both been high on, where again, we saw him today when you said there was no down lineman. It's like, well, anytime Deshawn Lynch is on the line, you kind of got to call him a lineman because he's not a linebacker. But then you see Brian Parham on the field, and you look at when DeMond ended up throwing the first turnover of fall camp, Carson Bruener pretty much goaded him into that by coming down in the box early and ending up dropping back. And so you're throwing, to your point, so many different looks at these guys. We haven't seen Will Rogers become susceptible to it, but it's also not been easy for Will to find some of those lanes, whether it be over the middle or outside, because the defense is doing so many different things. And it just it all ends up stacking on top of each other. And to be fair, this is also the defense not at full strength. If we're being completely honest, I think there's a couple of guys where once they get back, J1, the Parker brothers being, guys on the interior that you're not having right at the moment. And so you have some guys where just imagine what that pressure can look like, 3 or 4 weeks from now, or 2 months from now, when you have some of these guys. Because I think the one thing that I look at this defensive line, there's a lot of potential, right? Where I love what Sebastian Valdez has done in fall camp. And then you look at Jacob Bandis having another decent, fall camp as a, plugging the A gap and things like that. But there really seems to be that third guy that they're looking for. And whether it's Deshawn Lynch, whether it's Jacob Lane on the inside, there's a number of guys that they can go to. I'm just more curious. I don't think we're ever going to have a true resolution to this answer, but it's like who ends up winning out there. And I don't necessarily I don't think it's going to be a player. I think it's more or less going to be what the scheme ends up dictating, because Lynch could be that guy that wins out, or Voigt could be that guy that wins out there. But at the same point, you could also have, not saying Jay to win this year, but you could have one of those more prototypical edge, Russell Davis, for example, where he's added some weight. So, but we haven't seen him in fall camp as much. So there's a lot of guys where, when they get back, that could look even more different than what it looks like now. So there's so much more that this defense can show, even though the installs there, not all the pieces are there.
Right. And so just one thing I wanted to say there, when you're talking about Deshawn Lynch in the middle, it's not that there are no linemen on the field, because he lined up basically in a zero technique, but he was only in a 2-point stance, which is the thing, where there are a whole lot of different formations like that. And one thing that I remember talking, I feel like I've talked about it with a couple guys at this point through media days, things like that, is when you think about the Belichick defense, and as he calls it, the UW defense now, where it's not about necessarily where you line up, it's about where you finish. Where I feel like we've seen cornerbacks end up playing safety on a certain play. We've ended up seeing, safeties line up as linebackers. We've seen inside linebackers line up outside, which are all staples of what we've seen this defense become over so long in terms of Steve Belichick adjusting it and doing different things with it. But I feel like those are all things that are going to play to the benefit of the players. And one guy that certainly needs to be brought up in this discussion is a lot of this can function because Ephesians Prasock has been just playing at such a high level in fall camp, as we said on yesterday's show, where when a guy like that is able to just, take up half the field, you can just count on him in man coverage against the other team's best receiver, and he's going to win more often than they're going to. That's a huge benefit to you. That makes so much of this go, where all of a sudden you don't need to worry about that. And we can bracket this guy on the other side. We can send an extra rusher after the quarterback. We can make sure that this linebacker who's starting here can drop back and do this different thing. We have Cameron Broussard here. He's going to go over there. I know all that sounds ridiculous at a certain point, but all of this is what the defense actually looks like when you watch it. And it's really exciting to think about just how many different things it can do in the coming months, because it's going to cause a lot of confusion. We're going to see it multiple different points this year. I'm guaranteeing this right now, at different points in the season. We're going to look at a quarterback and just say, what is he looking at? And because it's going to turn into such an easy turnover for whoever it is, Carson Bruener, Kamren Fabiculanan, whoever it is that you want to throw out there, because the defense is going to throw something at them where it looks like one thing pre-snap, and once it's post-snap, it's not even like, they showed 3, they rotated into a cover 2, whatever you want to say. But no, it's that player was not supposed to be there. You weren't expecting him to be there, and it turns into an easy turnover. And that's going to really be a huge benefit to the defense this fall. And Lars, that being said, let's get on some of those spring guys that we mentioned. right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, and I gotta keep going back to the well because he just looked awesome yet again. I know he got a no decision against the Diamondbacks, but Paul Skeens has been on a tear. I like him for NL Rookie of the Year. I know he's the favorite at this point on FanDuel, but I still like those odds. NL Cy Young, still love seeing what's going on over there. Go check out all his odds over on FanDuel. So Lars, as we're through 5 practices now, as we said. One spring transfer that you look at him, you just say, yeah, that guy has been a major impact in one reason or another. Who are you going with?
I mean, it's a cliche because we just talked about him so much, but I think as we were saying that, the only reason the Ephesians Price Lock is able to do all that is because you have a guy like Cameron Broussard kind of covering just the back third of the secondary. Yeah. Because I'm assuming that you're talking about the guys that came in from after spring practice to now. Yes. So yes, so that would be Cameron Broussard because there's a couple that you can choose from. We should probably bounce a few more off each other. But I think the reason why Cam Broussard is so important when you look at what Cam Fab does, and then you look at that second safety spot when Cam does come back, Cam Broussard can play either one. I think that's what we're seeing in fall camp, where if the coaching staff wasn't as sold on what his abilities would be, he wouldn't be coming down to the box as much as they have him doing. He would play maybe more of that nickel safety reserve role. And also at the same point, it speaks to what the corners are allowing them to do to say, you know what, we trust our guys outside. Cam, you can kind of just do your own thing up the middle and we'll tie the two together. I think, Justin Harrington, again, is coming along, but I think it's fair to say Cam Broussard is significantly ahead of him at this point, just in terms of what
mainly due to the injury, yeah.
Right, which again is no slight to, but either way, your best availability is availability. So the guy that is able to suit up and show some things in 11, that to me is that's why I give him the inside track.
No, I get it. Because I don't disagree with that. I just want to make sure that it's clear where Justin has been working in team periods, but he's also still rehabbing from the torn ACL. So he hasn't been in every single drill in every team period where, as we're recording this on Monday, we saw Cam Broussard get some reps with the ones. So yes, because I don't disagree. He certainly does have the inside track, but it's more of a gradual ramp up. We haven't seen just what this full safety rotation is going to look like.
No, but I think that's kind of why you, to our point here and talking about the spring transfers, why you go and get 2, because you could have had Justin Harrington and you play up a Tristan Dunn, Michaela Steen, whoever you want to put next to Cam. But I think this is why Vinny looked at that room and said, you know what, let's just go and get 2 veterans, and if they both end up getting outplayed by the guys that are already on the roster, so be it. But we haven't necessarily seen that in fall camp. It's almost been the opposite, but that's also why you go and make sure, even after you got Justin Harrington, you say, you know what, let's go beat out, I believe it was Michigan or Michigan State, one of those 2 schools. I know both of them were ending up looking
Michigan, yeah.
But that's why you go out, and that's why Michigan wanted him so heavy, because he can do so many different things. And I think if you take out Broussard from that equation, whether Harrington is healthy or not, it doesn't look as secure as it does with Cam Broussard in that mix.
I certainly agree with you there. I want to move to the offensive side, and somebody who made life hard on Cameron Broussard and all the safeties today, and that's Keleki Latu. Keleki Latu had, in my opinion, his best day of practice so far. Brennan Carroll gave him a shout out when we talked to him after practice with all the other tight ends, and they had a really good day as a whole. And I was really impressed with him where, we've talked about him through the first couple of days where it's very clear they want to utilize his big frame in the red zone. They want to make sure that they just find ways to get him isolated in one-on-one coverage so he can do his thing, which is just go over the top of guys. And he looked like a really fluid mover after the catch, which was really nice because he's coming off an injury that he suffered during his 1 year at Nevada as well. So it's nice to see that he's healthy. He's moving around. He's looking really good. And he certainly still has some room to improve as a run blocker. But when I watch him as a pass catcher, I just say, yeah, that's a guy who you want to throw him out in the slot. Doesn't matter who's guarding him. He's going to find a way to have an advantage, mainly due to his length and his catch radius and his size. But when I watched him today, it was okay. Yeah, I see different ways that they want to get him the ball. Where one thing that, we were talking about a little bit after practice, we're talking about with some of the other media members as well, is Will Rogers is going to want to get the ball out quickly. Where, we talked about the offensive line on yesterday's show. It's not even about that. It's just Will Rogers wants to make sure that this offense is running at peak efficiency. And with a lot of that, it's getting the ball out quickly. It's getting the ball into the hands of his playmakers to get them into space. And Keleki Latu is certainly going to be one of those guys this year.
No doubt. I know I made the joke, not really a joke, because I knew when I said Quentin Moore would have 10 touchdowns or between 5 and 10 touchdowns, it was more or less kind of speaking to somebody in that room is going to go off. And whether it's Moore, because he's had a pretty good fall camp, or it's Latu, one of those two is going to pop off this season. There's no doubt about it. But to kind of feed into what you're saying on the opposite side of the ball, one guy that has made it difficult for both Will and Damon in fall camp is a guy that I know you love talking about, so I'm going to take this opportunity to do it, and that's Deshawn Lynch. Where I know we talked about him a little bit, but there's so many different things that, when we looked at that initially, we're like, why do they need another edge rusher? And again, as we've kind of detailed on the show, he's not just an edge rusher. He's got a guy that can play the 3-tech and, outside. And I think when you're talking about causing opposing Big Ten quarterbacks and, to be fair, also in the run game problems, it starts with a guy like that, because Logan Sagapolu was a guy who I initially wanted to talk about, but I've also talked about him enough, so maybe I'll leave him for you, or just for later day, because Logan does something different where he's kind of that bigger body, that true nose tackle that eats out two blockers in the middle of the defensive line. But Deshawn Lynch can do that and also be on the outside. And I think, to me, when you start looking at some of those 5 and 6 down fronts, when you're starting to look at how does Washington stack up in the red zone, are they able to force teams into field goals, or do they get blown off the edge? That's where you're talking about having a veteran guy like that who can do one or the other and not just leave Voight Snoopy as that tweener guy who, while we both like what he's been able to do in assignment Washington, he's not Deshawn Lynch. Now, having both those guys on the same field at the same time, that's fine. And I think that's what makes, similar to the Cameron Broussard discussion, it affords Washington the ability to do more things because you have a guy who can do so many different things.
No, absolutely. And that's something, just the more I watch him, the more you see that was one of the reasons that we wanted to lead with the defense and talk about the defense, because we saw for the first time today, Deshawn Lynch lining up in all those different spots, where the first couple of days we've seen him on the edge. We've seen him be asked to do a lot of different things, whether it's stunt, whether it's at the edge. We've seen him do all those things through the first couple of days. And now that we're seeing him start to get installed into some of that other versatility, that's really good to see. And that's something that obviously the more of those guys you have in this defense, the better it really can be. And one guy who I really want to talk about in terms of, he has certainly been still adjusting a little bit, but another guy who it's been really nice to have in the middle, after talking to Brendan Carroll today, is D'Angelo Titialii, where watching him, there certainly been a couple snaps that haven't been his best, but the more you watch him adjust, he spent the last 3 days with the first team now in the middle at center, and he still seems to be improving every day. We talked to Landon Hatchett after practice, who said, he's a really good athlete. I really like watching him play. I've been able to learn a lot from him because he has so much experience under his belt. And that still feels like one of the reasons that they brought him in, where Brendan Carroll talked about it. He said, as we're going to be able to start working Landon back in a little bit more, we're going to start getting him some reps at guard and doing some different things with him. So it's nice to just not only have that versatility, but know that there's depth at center, where he certainly has room to improve, but knowing that depth is there has been crucial for this offensive line.
Exactly. And to be fair, again, did he have his best day? Probably not, but at the same point, the bad snaps that he does have, he still is able to, move some guys in the run game. And I think you can kind of see what the end product is going to be once, the snaps start to get a little more consistent. Because if you think about, it's okay to have that, but he shouldn't necessarily have too much problem, because he didn't have that many bad snaps when he was at Portland State. And I actually remember his biggest game, arguably, of his career was against Washington Huskies Stadium, and it was his best game by far in terms of his PFF grade. So he's not afraid of playing up to the moment. It's just a matter of, okay, you can have a few hiccups, but once we get into week 2 and 3 of fall camp, you want those exchanges better, because otherwise Landon can come right back in and take that spot. And now D'Angelo becomes a potential guy at right guard to compete with Enoch, and there's a lot of different things that he can afford to do. But having that veteran guy, because if you take out Titialii, now you have Zach Henning, who's looked good, but when you're starting a redshirt freshman at center, especially with a veteran quarterback. You ideally want, and there's no question Zach Henning is going to play this season. It's just a matter of when does he come in? How does that look? How much does he actually end up getting this season to build into 25, which we would expect him and Landon to have a shot at that center job next season more so than this season.
Right. And that's, one of the things where we talk with Landon, he said he's been doing some contact drills. They just haven't put him in any of the team stuff yet, where Landon told us he's been working off to the side with Zach Durfee one-on-one to make sure, he's still doing contact, still getting some of those blocking drills. And Brennan Carroll said they've kept him out of some of the team stuff recently to just make sure that nothing can go wrong. He doesn't suffer a setback. And Landon wouldn't put a date on his first team period drills. We're still going with what Jedd Fisch said, that he'll be participating in the Raise the Wolf game, mock game that they're holding on August 17th with the first team. So we're going to keep an eye out for that. And, until we get to that point, until we see what that looks like, D'Angelo is the guy. It looks like that they want him to be the guy. And Zach has looked good there. Zach's also looked good at guard when they have to ask him to play there, where he's, shown to be another versatile piece as well. So when we keep looking at that, it's just, that's one of the things with D'Angelo. It's having that depth piece, just having an extra guy on the interior, whether it's guard and Enoch Vimahai at left and right guard, whether it's, D'Angelo at one spot and still guard Memolar at the other, or it's Zach Henning at the other, maybe Paki Finau at one of the other spots, where no matter where it is, just the more depth you have at those positions is critical. And it's nice to see D'Angelo stepping up to the moment. And, speaking of the offensive line, they did a really nice job clearing the way for the running game on Monday. And we'll get there right after a message from our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors does everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. For all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So, Lars, I feel one of the biggest things that we noticed were the defense certainly won the day. The defense absolutely won the day on Monday. But the running game really looked strong, whether it was Jonah Coleman, whether it was Cameron Davis. We saw a couple nice runs from Sam Adams. That the running game, not only is it going to be heavily involved this season, but as we've said before on the show, it could be a really, really underrated one in the Big Ten.
And speaking of underrated, I know you didn't leave him off intentionally because he didn't get as much run, but Jordan Washington, also true freshman, got some run with it was the first team offense because Will Rogers was the quarterback. Wasn't a ton, right. But to be clear, I'm not saying expect Jordan Washington to get first team reps a ton this season, but it does speak to, again, what we said a couple of weeks. I remember saying a couple of weeks on the show, there's no way you can keep Jordan Washington off the field. Now, I think, there was a discussion had a couple of days ago amongst some of us and UW's SID Jeff Bechtold about, scat backs for Washington. And Jordan Washington, definitely, when you look at him, he doesn't have the size of Adam Mohammed, doesn't have the size of Jonah Coleman. He is very much a smaller, more compact back. But there's that perfect opportunity for him and a guy like Daniel Ngata, who's, I believe, a senior now, to get maybe some run in space and just get the ball into his hands. We saw surprisingly more running between the tackles in Washington than I was expecting. Jordan Washington, that is. That I was expecting, especially with his skill set. But I think that kind of just is Scotty Graham's way of saying, well, I can get you the ball in space, but can I also get you the ball between the tackles? And this is the perfect time in fall camp to do that, where you're installing the offense. And so that means obviously they see Jordan Washington as a guy who could potentially play a role for this team, but knowing you still have so many other backs. And ideally you would like to see Sam Davis really start to not maybe emerge as like a third back, but just get a respectable amount of carries, but get a couple of touchdowns in meaningful games this season, for everything that he's been through in the program and able to stay all the way through. He looked like he is a guy who could do a job if he can stay healthy.
So I'm assuming you mean Sam Adams, not
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that up because I wanted the reason I asked, because you certainly made a very fair point where Sam had a couple of nice touchdowns toward the end of practice. He had a nice jump cut that scored from 10, 15 yards out on the ground. And then the final play of the day was he caught a 4-yard swing pass from, I believe it was Will Rogers for a touchdown. Mm-hmm. And I certainly agree with you, but I'm going in a different direction because I really want to talk about Cam Davis, where Cam Davis looked really, really strong today. And just another group of, he had his best practice yet. Cam Davis was in that group for me, where he looked like he showed some of the strength and the power that he did before he got hurt, as well as the ability to change direction and some of the long speed that he has, where he's certainly not Jordan Washington, but I mean, very, very few guys have that kind of speed. But the more I watched him today, the more I said, okay, yeah, I can certainly see a co-starter thing going on here between Cam and Jonah Coleman, where Jonah, just the power that he demonstrates between the tackles is so much fun to watch, but he's equally shifty. He's equally hard to tackle for many reasons other than just his strength, which is a lot of fun to watch. And having two of those guys, when we'll see some 2-back sets, we'll see a whole lot of different things from this offense. Having a guy like Cam Davis is going to open so much of it up, where we've seen some of these guys split out and play out as a wide receiver, where I feel like that's going to be a role where we'll see him get a couple snaps in some of those spots, but Jonah might get a few more there. But having a guy like Cam in the backfield who you can rely on if you needed him to take 10, 15, even 20 carries a game, that he's certainly going to be really, really good in that role.
Exactly. Well, and the other thing you can think about is you could have the 2-back system in different ways, where you can do it out of the shotgun, or you could do it as Jonah Coleman as a fullback, and Cam Davis, if you really want to go old school with the I formation and kind of get creative in that. But that more or less would be kind of a red zone package or something. And that's why Cam Davis is so important, because you have a big bulldozer, pinball machine, whatever you want to call Jonah Coleman. But Cam Davis also is no slouch in the red zone either. Like we've seen it, where a bulk of his touchdowns in 22, as you mentioned on the show, came in that kind of goal line, that final 5 to 10 yard area. And that's not to say that he couldn't be that guy in space as well. But I think it's almost like adding Jonah Coleman as a transfer was kind of a shoe-in, right? You knew there was one of those guys from Arizona that you were going to get. Jonah was the safest bet, especially with Scotty Graham as running back coach coming up. So Jonah would be a good back, especially, as the lead back. But when you look at the depth behind him, having Sam Adams is almost like having another Jonah Coleman transfer come in, where it's like, okay, we didn't have him last year, so you can't look at last season and say, if Cam Davis has another, 1,000-yard season and 10 touchdowns like he had last season. Well, it wasn't last season, it was 2 seasons ago. And so there's not that recency bias with Cam Davis, but it's almost like, hey, don't forget about me. I still have all this production. And when you think about what 22 could have, looked like with Wayne Talapapa and Cam Davis, it's almost like Jonah could be a better version of, no disrespect to Wayne, because Wayne ended up being a fantastic back. But I think if you can only have one, like I asked Brendan Carroll after practice, Jonah Coleman or Wayne Talapapa, I think you're taking Jonah Coleman. But it's a good problem to have if that's your discussion, because Wayne, to his credit, was a very integral part of that 22 run. Because if you just take away Wayne, that running back room looks a lot different in 22.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I feel like that's one of the things that we've seen from Jonah is he's really stepped up as that leader that you need him to be off the field as well, where we watch him on the field and you say, yeah, that's a guy who's going to be a really, really good running back in the Big Ten. But he's made that step off the field as well. And, we've seen it radiate through guys like Cam, like Adam Mohammed, who's talked a lot about him. And I mean, that's, one of the other guys we haven't talked about yet, and certainly by, not intentionally, but I really want to talk about Daniel Ngata as well, because you've been asking the question on the show a lot, where how's he going to fit in this offense? What's that role going to look like for him? And, we saw him make a really nice one-handed catch during the open period of practice today. I put that out on Twitter, and he's somebody where the more you watch him and the more you look at him, he certainly looks like a guy who can play that role. And if he's the guy that takes the most snaps, running back, split out wide receiver on this team, are you shocked? I'm certainly not. And then on top of that, he looks like he's gotten a lot more reliable as a pass protector, and he can just be one of those guys where one of this coaching staff's favorite things to do is, like we said earlier, get the ball into the hands of their playmakers quickly. There's no easier way to do that than on a swing pass to a running back. And that certainly seems like a role that if there's anybody on this team who's going to fill that role, the best, that's Daniel Ngata.
Yeah, and you look at him, he's got the build to hold up in terms of, being a blocker, right? Because there's some guys where you look at Jordan Washington, for example, and you think, okay, yeah, he's a little smaller side. And Daniel, to his credit, is not the biggest guy in the room, right? But when you look at him, he's like, yeah, I could easily take a licking and still go. And I think still not losing that speed, because when you look at him get the ball in open space, he can take off. And I think he's a guy that has really sneaky speed. Again, is one of those guys we just haven't seen in a ton, where we saw it in kickoffs last season, but it was almost like, okay, why is he not doing that on offense, especially when you're struggling so hard to find running backs? And for whatever reason, Staff didn't use him. But I think Scotty Graham, I remember talking to him in media day before fall camp got going, and he was the guy where it's like, okay, yeah, we're going to find a way to make sure Daniel Ngata gets the ball in his hands. When that also could be on kickoff as well. We still haven't gotten to see a ton of that in fall camp, so I would imagine that would be another area where Daniel Ngata can impact the game. But yeah, I mean, he can also run between the tackles, so it's not like he's a guy that has to get the ball in space because he can't handle it up the middle. I think that's what I'm trying to drive at, is when you look at him physically, yeah, he's not the most imposing guy, but in a way, it's like not a poor man's Myles Gaskin, because Myles was really good, but a smaller, compact back who can still run between the tackles, has good vision, probably has a little more speed than Myles did in terms of when he gets into the open field. But either way, when you look at all the different types, it's basically we could say the same thing about so many positions on this team. We started talking about it on the defensive line in the first couple of segments. Secondary, same thing. Running back, same thing. You have so many different guys who can do a bevy of different things. That's why you're not going to look at Jonah Coleman and think he's a 20, 25 back carry a game kind of guy. Not that he couldn't be, but there's just no reason to, abuse Jonah like that when you have so many different guys to turn to.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And that certainly feels like a great place for us to wrap up today. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. And thank you for making Locked On Huskies your first listen today. Now go check out Locked On College Football. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment, Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a reminder for everybody to go check out our Locked On Huskies Insider program as well, where you get a free 2-week trial, then it's $4.99 after that. We just posted a whole bunch of more interviews from Media Day, from all the ones that we've talked about at practice over the last couple of days, whether it be Landon Hatchett, Drew as a party, Steve Belichick's in there, a whole bunch of other ones like that. So make sure you go check all those out. We're also going to be post exclusive Q&As. We dropped some recruiting stuff in there not too long ago. And on top of that, we're giving insider practice reports. We're posting some other stuff that maybe we didn't get to on here, because our insiders get first dibs at all that sort of stuff. They get one-on-ones. If you ever have any questions, you can just text us directly. It's super easy. Everything is right to your inbox. It's fast. It's easy. We love doing it. It's a lot of fun. And thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere, updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.